disabled it.
Can you try again? We gave you co-hosting now.
Yep. Okay, fine. We try again. Oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we can see it now.
You can see.
Yeah.
I'll just do something more here. Here.
Yeah, we can see it now.
How do I change my slides? Funny.
Yeah, click on the screen.
Oh yeah, I can click here. How do I back? Here. Here. That's not so easy to back. Oh, here it works.
Yeah, okay.
Excellent.
Great.
Shall we leave it like this?
Yeah, that will be fine.
Excellent. And there's enough light on myself and you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you properly. We can see you. So I think everything's good.
Very good.
Okay. So I think we can start. We now started Facebook translation, Facebook streaming. So I guess people will just come and join us. And I will switch on Ukrainian right now and then like in English back again.
Excellent, excellent.
Okay. Добрий вечір всім. Дякую, що приєдналися до нашої лекції. Дякую, що приєдналися до нашої лекції. Сьогодні це друга лекція з циклу Ukrainian Cities Rebuilding Ukraine, Ukrainian Cities of the Future. І сьогодні у нас буде друга лекція з цього циклу, лекція з Яном Гейлом. І якщо ви слухаєте нас англійською мовою, ви можете продовжувати слухати. Якщо вам необхідний переклад, ви можете зробити його. Подивіться на свою панель інструментів, знайдіть значок планети, там написано переклад, translation або перевод, і змініть мову на українську. І тоді ви зможете почути нашу перекладачку Анну. Якщо у вас вийшло, то напишіть, будь ласка, в чат плюсик. І ми так будемо знати, що у вас вийшло ввімкнути переклад. У кого вийшло, будь ласка, напишіть. Чи чуєте ви Анну, нашу перекладачку? Так, бачу, що є. Так, добре, чудово. Okay, then I will switch into English. So, good evening, everyone. I hope you are now safe and you are listening our lecture from the safe place. We are going to continue our series. It is called the Ukrainian Cities of the Future. It's a series of lectures, discussions with urban development experts, innovators, philosophers about the future of Ukraine's urban development. And after the war, we will be rebuilding not only the urban and public spaces, but also the society. And the project is organized in collaboration between Ukrainian-Danish Youth House and media and design space Pixlab. We are both working and creating projects to support Ukrainian youth. And you should definitely check our Facebook pages to know more. There is plenty of stuff happening right now. And today we continue with the second lecture by Jan Gehl. Jan is a prominent Danish architect, consultant in urban design in Copenhagen, author of books on urbanism, architecture and urban design, and he is head of the Gehl Architects Architectural Bureau. The event today will be divided into two parts. In the first part, Jan will deliver a lecture, and then we will have Q&A session. So for the comfortable lecture, please keep your microphones muted till the discussion. And Jan, you can tell us now, what are you going to tell us?
I'm sitting here in Copenhagen, and I'm sending to all of you all over Ukraine my warmest greetings. We are following day by day the struggle for freedom and democracy in Ukraine, and we feel very strongly for you all, and we wish you success and in repelling the awful invasion you are the goal of it this time. I shall today talk a little bit about cities for the future based on my, by now, 60 years of experience in city planning and in research in city planning. I will start right away. When we talk about cities for the future, of course, we have to realize what cities and what future we are talking about. The future is very different, and the tasks and the goals and the solutions are very different depending on what kind of cities we talk about. What about Dubai? What would be the future of an awful city like Dubai? What will be the future of European cities like Bucharest, which have been completely overrun by motor cars? What will be the future from cities like Dhaka in Bangladesh, again, where the pedestrians, the public life, and the car traffic has completely gone into a permanent chaotic situation where people are suffering every day? And of course, there will be other questions when we talk about the future of cities in Ukraine. These will be very different stories. But let me return now. Just general discussion about cities for the future, because there are great confusion here. On all kinds of conferences, you hear all the time people talk about that when we have automatic cars, electric automatic cars, all our problems will be solved. All the problems we ever had will be solved. But look at this drawing from Ford Motor Company and think about, is this a wonderful world where all the problems are solved? I'm shuddering to think about this. Look at where the people are walking. Look at the quality of spaces here. Awful. Then they will also say that all the rest of the problems will be solved by drones and helicopters. And then they foresee a future where the sky is full of flying objects. Again, an awful city is in the sights. They are talking about the smart city, which will solve all the problems. And all these things have one thing together. They are based on very expensive technology. They will take a lot of time to implement. They will they will demand great investments. And if we look at the various types of cities, certainly developing cities and cities which have been ruined very much will not be able to invest in all these funny mechanic gimmicks. And also, if you look at the kind of perspectives, if you look up on the internet and ask for cities of the future, you come up with a selection like this one. And you can look at these pictures and see if you would like to live anywhere in these places, if you would like to have your children grow up in places like this, or if you would like to be old in places like this. I think there's so much crap about the future of cities which are found, and most of them is about selling some gimmicks and having big investments done for as many people as possible, so that some people can be very rich very fast. My take is another one. I think that where we are there, yeah, I have a reflection. Maybe instead of looking at all these technocratic and expensive gimmicks, we should look at the ideas we already have and the examples we already have and see if there is something here we can use for a start. And my take is, whatever you have to do, put people first in your city planning. Whatever you do, there are some first principles. Before you buy the automatic cars and the smart city, make sure that the people in your cities are having as good a condition as possible in the new future of cities. We have a problem. For the past 50 years, we as mankind has done whatever we can to make life complicated for people in our cities. We have chased people out of our cities. We've had a fantastic dominating planning paradigm called modernism. It started in the 30s and 20s, but actually only in 1960 did it really start to be widespread. And that was a complete revolution in city planning. Everything we ever did as human beings were thrown out, and we were told that now we should live in a completely new way. We were told that we should never live in cities anymore. We should live in separated buildings. And this was a great departure from everything we had before. Before the modernism, we always built cities out of spaces. The cities were constituted by spaces, and in the spaces, all the life of the city were taking place. There we walked from one end of the city to the other. It combined the various functions of the city. We had the markets, we had the important events in the city, all going on in spaces. If we think of the old cities, we have them in Ukraine and we have them all over Europe. But in the old cities, which were made of spaces, when we think of these cities, we can remember names of a lot of streets and a lot of squares, but only we can think of very few important buildings, the cathedral, the town hall, the castle, maybe. If you think of the new towns, the modernism, they changed all this focus on spaces for people to focus on objects. It was a very technocratic view on life. Cities should be a machine for living, not a wonderful place to live. And only the buildings were put in focus, and whatever was not built upon was leftover space. And there's nothing more useless than leftover space. So instead of a city of spaces, now you have a city of buildings with a lot of leftover space. That was actually the model which was used by the Soviet Union to develop the cities very fast and very technocratic in all the parts of the old Soviet sphere of influence. If you think of the new cities today, also in the Western world and in the Gulf states, whatever, you can remember no spaces because there are no spaces. The only thing you can remember from the new cities are funny shaped buildings where the architects are trying to make a more fun building next time. They're all the same content. The only thing which is different is the shape. This is what we see as what we call modern cities. But I think it's a great step backwards. With the modernism, we had the result that it was a goodbye to the concern for people and social life in the cities. All the shared spaces were gone. Instead, people were milling around in leftover spaces. Another result of modernism was a goodbye to the knowledge of good human scale. In the old days, we knew exactly how to build good cities and spaces for people. But with modernism, we lost that ability. And now people are sailing around in leftover space. There's no definition of the spaces. They are out there in the wind and the rain and just floating freely in this open space. Another result of this very technocratic thinking was a goodbye to human scale in relation to building. It's actually so that in a high building, you can only follow what's going on in the city around you until the fifth floor. Everything over the fifth floor is not part of the city. It's part of the airline system. And here are some illustrations. One is a view from up in the high rise to the kids, which one is my kid, by the way. And the other one is a view from the playground a little boy is yelling, "Mama," and then you have to choose where your mama might be. We are not built to look upwards in this way. That is against the human scale, against the human senses. We can see this modernization, this modernism all over the world, also very much in the Western world until we got it stopped. That was a completely new way of building cities and housing. It was never tried before. You see it in Denmark here. You see it in East Germany here. And you see it still being practiced in China, Korea, East Europe. You see it actually having been practiced a lot in the old Soviet era, in the Soviet sphere. Also a lot in Ukraine. If you ask if people love this change of principle of building cities, I can show you this and many more images of people showing in various ways that this technocratic, automatic way of building housing and building cities were never popular with the people. They were running out screaming from this kind of technocratic organization as in the city as a machine for living. Here, some Australian students have put a label on some of these buildings. They are built by peak male architects, technocrats. It's only for quantity and not for quality. The other thing which has happened to our cities in the past 50 years has been the car invasion. Again, it is about 1960 we started to see in the various countries a big number of cars being introduced, and making the cars happy became the major purpose of city planning for many, many years. We can see this development. This is a scene from Copenhagen in 1905. Copenhagen was by then a peaceful city where people were dominating the spaces. People were promenading all over without any problem or any concerns. There was one car, no problem. Then just 50 years later, Copenhagen looked like this. All the squares were taken over by parking, and all the streets were full to capacity of trams and bicycles and cars and pedestrians, and noise and confusion and pollution. And also with modernism came another serious blow to the work with human scale. In the old days, all the spaces in the cities has been done for people walking. All the spaces were made in what I call 50 km/h architecture. That means that the spaces are small, because if you move slowly among people, you don't need much space. You were close to the building, you could see all the details, you could see the signs could be very small, you could easily see them, and you could see other people, and you could see maybe in the distance the mountains, and close by the people. It was human scale, 5 km/h architecture. With the invasion of the motor car, we started to have 60 km/h architecture. All the spaces became huge because you can't move at speed without having maneuvering space. The signs became enormous because you can't see small signs when you're moving quickly. The building stopped to have any details because you can't see and enjoy details when you are rushing by. And there were no people. There might be people, but you could not see them. So it was big spaces full of steel instead of small spaces full of intimacy and of people. That's a fantastic change in scale in our cities. All this started in 1960. And what did we, it really started to develop very rapidly in 1960. Of course, the cars were older as an invasion, and modernism already started in the 20s and 30s. But when it really took off in 1960, we can ask, what did we know about quality for people at that time? And the answer to this is we knew practically nothing. Then there came, of course, a counter movement of humanistic idealists who started to say, hey, what are we doing to our cities? We are killing our cities. We are ruining the good quality in the cities and making them into technocratic monsters. The first great voice here was from America, from New York, Jan Gehl, who wrote in her book, Death and Life of Great American Cities, that if we let the modernists and the motorists decide the future of the cities, we will not have great cities, but we will have dead cities. My own work started, of course, at the same time, or it started about the same time as Jan Gehl was writing over in New York. I graduated as an architect in 1960. That is 62 years ago. I was trained in School of Architecture in the 50s. And what did we do in School of Architecture in the 50s? We were trained to be good modernists, and a good city would be something which looked smart from an aeroplane. So we spent 5 years moving objects around, and when we have an interesting pattern, it would be a good city. That was what we were told. And if we were told that people are very adaptable. It doesn't matter what you build, as long as you build it, people will be happy, and people are adaptable and they can adapt to anything. So it doesn't matter what you do, just do what is aesthetically or architecturally interesting. This is one of our professors. He was famous for saying that a good housing area is something which looks good from a freeway. And here he has been very successful in Sweden in making some housing area which might look good from the freeway, but certainly doesn't look very interesting at eye level for the people who live there. But I got this education. I went out of School of Architecture to do all these wonderful modernistic things and be very sweet to the motor cars. And then I married a psychologist. And then suddenly we had new questions in our household. The young psychologists who came and the young architects, we always discussed what was going on in the cities. And the psychologists kept saying, why are you architects not interested in people? Why don't they teach you anything about people in the schools of architecture? You are bloody technocrats. That's what you are. You must know much more to make good housing and good cities for people. That was, to me, a very interesting new world which opened. And in my case, I had to go back to architecture school to study 40 more years. And what I studied was to make people visible, to find out about how people use cities, how people used architecture. And I also found out why they didn't tell me anything first time I was in School of Architecture. That was because nothing was known. It was not believed that the built form and architecture had influence on the quality of life for people. We had to study it from the very beginning. And I personally sat on my behind for 40 years and watched how people used architecture in cities, where people would love to go, where they would never go, where there were empty places and where there were places full of joy and life on people. All this very soon started to be very logical, and it was possible to put it down in my thesis, in my first book, which came out exactly 50 years ago in 1971. It's called Life Between Buildings and is now still available all over the world and has been published many, many places. And it's such a great interest and joy for me as an old person to realize that this research on how to humanize cities have been so well received and is now being used in all parts of the world. Especially, I'm very happy to see that my books are published in developing countries like Bangladesh and Myanmar and Malaysia and Philippines and so forth. Later on, actually 40 years later, I wrote a more comprehensive book about the same subject, but now including 40 years of research and also many examples of how humanizing cities may look like. This book, I'm very happy to say, is out in Ukrainian, and I had a very nice time being over in Kiev to publish this book in 2018. Here you can find all the philosophies and ideas and advice from me. You can find it in this book, if you can find the book. If I shall conclude this part, I could say that after 50 years of research, we now know quite a bit about how to make fine cities for people. There's still much to be learned, but we actually know what to do. The problem is that somebody will go and do it, and that we can get rid of all this quantity orientation, all this technocratic approach, all this city as a machine for living thinking, which is still around in many places. We have the knowledge to do a much more humane and people-oriented city. What we learned in this research, of course, was that we have an enormous influence on the quality of life for people. We say that first we form the cities, but then the cities very much form our lives. We also say that we form the buildings, but then the buildings shape us. If you live in this way or in the other way, it could be a completely different lifestyle, where your children will have one kind of upbringing in this place and another kind of childhood in the other place. You may have much more to do with your neighbors in one place than in the other place. It's all a matter very much on the physical form of your habitation. We also know that quality in cities is extremely important for the life in the city, for the meeting of people with other citizens in the city. We can make spaces which are so awful that the only thing people do is try to get out of that space as quickly as possible. Or we can make spaces which have so many qualities that people want to stay there, to spend time there, to sit there, to watch the people there. They could come from all over the city to just this particular place. So instead of running out of the space as fast you can, these other spaces, you actually, their destinations, you come from all over the city. And we have studied some places like this and found that if you make a good square, you can have 10 times more life in that square than in the bad square, even if there are the same number of people coming to this place every day. 10 times more activity in the square with friendly details. So we have an enormous influence. While all this research was going on, we could see some wind has changing, and by 2022, we have a distinct change of city planning challenges. We want very much to have livable, humane cities. We need to have sustainable cities. It's become a growing problem that we need cities which are good for the health, inviting for healthy life. And we realize that we need increasingly good cities to be older. I'll take a look at this. We've always had cities made of spaces, and we still love the spaces where we can meet our fellow citizens very, very much. And I would say it's a human need of very great importance to have spaces where you can walk and where you can meet your fellow citizens. The greatest attraction in any city has always been the other cities. It's never been the architecture or the cars. It has been the life of people, the other people. We watch them every time, and we get inspiration, we get inspired, whatever, from watching people. So life in the city is very, very important, and spaces for life is important. If you're in doubt whether this is still the case, you can just look at how architects are doing their presentation drawings today. Every time an architect hand in a project, you can see it's filled with hysterically happy people who are doing all kinds of funny things. All these people indicate that it must be a very nice place. If it was not nice, they would go home. But if they are there, that's a sign that this is a good project. We love life. We love people. We also now know that it's a very serious challenge to do something for the climate conditions, to make sustainable cities, to reduce pollution and emission of CO2. And not to go into details, I can just say that the more we walk, the more we bicycle, and the more we use public transportation, the better it will be for the climate. The doctors tell us that we now, in many parts of the Western world or the developed world or the rich world, we have a serious new problem, which is called by the doctors the sitting syndrome. And we have to do something about it because people die earlier, they have a lousy old age, they have to go much to the doctor and to the hospital. And it will be much easier and much cheaper and have a much better quality of life for the elderly people if throughout our life we make it a habit to move more and to sit less. The doctors say, use 1 hour a day for moderate exercise. Go for a walk or take a bicycle, but do 1 hour every day. That is also what World Health Organization recommend to the city planners. Make sure that people walk and bike as much as possible in your new modern city planning. Another thing which is different now is that we now in all our societies have an increasingly population of elderly people. Many elderly people actually have 10 or 20 years of life, of good life, after they retire and before they die. And they want to have a wonderful world where they can have a good time. And that is a new challenge. We've never had old people in great numbers in our cities before, but now we have, and we have to make wonderful cities to be old in, but certainly also wonderful cities to be young in. And some people say that if you are sweet to the children and sweet to the old people, all the rest of the people will also have a better time in the cities. If we look closer at these demands and look carefully after, if you look carefully after people in the city, then you will efficiently address all the 4 issues. You will have a more livable, more sustainable, more healthy city and a good city to be old in. So looking after pedestrians, bicycles and public life is a very good strategy for having a good city, which can be good in many, many different aspects. Then we can ask, are there cities today who loudly has a policy saying, we will do everything we can to invite people to walk and to bicycle as much as possible in the course of the daily doings? Yeah, there are now cities all over the world who are doing this very much. And that is also what you should do when you are doing rebuilding and restructuring in Ukraine. I can tell you a little bit about my home city of Copenhagen, because it's one of the cities in the world which has done most to humanize the city and to invite for people to use the city. It has changed from a traffic place to a people place, and they've had 60 years now of people first policies. So it's a very nice city to live in, Copenhagen. I showed you before that in 1950, it was completely full of cars. Now all the cars have been removed, and all the squares in Copenhagen has been transformed from a car square to a people square. And in the period from they started with the first car-free city street in 1962 until 2022, you can see a fantastic change in the city. More and more spaces and streets and riverfronts and waterfronts have been reconstructed so that it's really inviting and wonderful for people. Many of them, most of them are now car-free, and you can do whatever you like and let your kids run all over the place. Also in Copenhagen, they've had a policy of making a very good invitation for people to bicycle. They have introduced over the years, we are talking about 60 years, they've introduced step by step a complete bicycle lane system all over the city. And these are good bicycle lanes with a curb to the traffic and a curb to the pedestrians, where you can, all the generations can bicycle in safety and comfort. So it's really inviting. And we've seen that the more you invite bicycling, the more people find out that it's a smart way to get around in a modern city to do a bicycling. And you can see that year by year, there's been more and more bicycling in Copenhagen. Just before the COVID pandemic, we had figures of about 49% of everybody going to work or to study in Copenhagen were arriving to the city on their bicycles. Just 10 years ago, it was only 38%. So we can see that the more you invite, the more you get. And that's actually the lesson from Copenhagen. If you give good invitation to walking, to public life and bicycling, what will happen? You will have more bicycling, more public life, and more walking. And to me, that is what the 21st century in cities should be about. We knew in the previous century that the more roads we made, the more traffic we got. Now we know that the more friendly we are in city planning, the more people are happy and the more walking and life we have in the cities. That's a very good knowledge, and we have this clearly documented in Copenhagen. So putting people first in city planning is what I suggest you look after in Ukraine also. Put the first things first, because whatever you do, you can always be kind to people for a start. And putting people first in city planning, that's the simplest and the cheapest you can do. It doesn't take much investment to make good conditions for walking and bicycling. And it will create a better city for everyone, for all generations. And it's city planning which can be used in all parts of the world, regardless of the economy in that place. That means also in many developing countries, it's a very good policy to put people first. And finally, you can start tomorrow. There's nothing holding you back. It's so simple. In this book I mentioned, I have put down a number of advice for planning, and that is collected in the chapter called Toolbox. I shall show you some of these advice. We have a number of challenges, but we also have tools to meet them. I will divide this little part in 6 questions. Life-based buildings, density, scale, ground floors, climate, and proper invitations. First, I would say that with the modernists, they turned everything around. They started with the buildings, and then they had the no man's land, and then they did some landscaping. And in the end, they looked out of the window to see if there was life, which there was generally not. That was completely different of what we did before in our city planning history. In we always did considerations about the life, and then what spaces would you need for the life, and then you should place the building so that they will make the spaces and thus create the framework for life in the city. So we have to turn the way of city planning around, look at life, space, and buildings in that order. The other way we have seen now for 50 years, that doesn't work at all. There's much talk about need of density, but we see many silly density. We see that you generally we put out too much space for too few people, and we have these enormous leftover spaces which are not at all exciting. This is a Sunday morning in a housing area in Zurich in Switzerland, and as you can see, all the people have come out. There are not many people here, far too much space and not a very pleasant space. You see that they always put like too high buildings and too big spaces. This is a new town in Copenhagen in the rush hour. It's far too wide. There's far too much space here to be a nice 5 km/h place for people. Then we can look at density, and certainly high-rise is not a good answer to density. It is a good answer to quantity, and I would say that high-rise is the lazy architect's answer to density. You have to work much harder, but you could get a much better result by making lower stuff and making much carefully work with the spaces and not the funny shapes. I've talked much about scale, but we have to observe scale very carefully, but that's very important for people's well-being. Mankind is still a walking animal. We're made for walking. That's where all the important things in our life happens. And we have to make so that we can also be a human being in our housing and city areas. We are the same size as we've always been. We can walk as fast as we always could. We have the same senses, and nothing has changed here. But what has changed is the way we built. In the old days here in Singapore, they had 4 or 5-story buildings, very nice scale, very popular with the people. Then came all the famous architects and built all these awful high-rise where nobody will go and spend time in front of these. Units get bigger and bigger, but people are still slow and small. Then I would like to point to the importance of the ground floors. We have found that the closer to the ground people live, the more they use the shared spaces. And there's a direct relation between how high you are up and how much you use the surrounding spaces. We know that if we make very good planning for the first, second, and third floor, we can have a much richer life in housing areas. We found that almost half of everything is generated by people living in the lower floors. So we have to work very hard on the edge here. In Denmark now, in Copenhagen, it is a law that whenever you do housing, you should make a soft edge, you should make ground floors so that people can come out and enjoy, and that will cause other people to like to come there. And that is a very, very simple way to make a much better city. Soft edges, good ground floors in the ground floor. Then all over the world, we have to consider the climate situation very carefully. In some countries, it's very cold and very warm. In other countries like Denmark, it is a little bit cold in the winter and not so warm in the summer. Every time we have different conditions and we have to observe them very carefully. What we have to do is to protect against what we don't want about the climate and make possibilities to enjoy what we want about the climate. In Denmark, we have to protect against the wind, and we have to make sure that people can get the sunshine when the sunshine is there to be had. It's different from all parts of the world. Here is some example of the old Danish city, which was made so that the wind went over and all the sun came into the city and warmed the stones. And the climate in this old city is much, much better than the climate in Denmark, because they have improved the climate by clever architecture. They knew what to do, how to do it in the old days. If you do these modern things, you can find that you make a much more severe situation. The high building catch the wind and make turbulence, and it may be so bad that you have to make a fence around the sandbox, or the children will fly out of the sandbox, and certainly the sand will fly out. So in one case, you can make a much worse climate, and in the other case, you can make a much better climate. What would you prefer? You should also make sure that whenever you build, you should look closely at the shadows and the wind conditions. Many times when they build high buildings, they ruin the life for a lot of people in the surroundings based on where you live in the world. Here in Denmark, we have very low sun angles, so we have severe shadows from the high buildings, and we do very few high buildings actually for the same reason. Then there will be that we need proper invitations. I mentioned this about that if you invite for walking and bicycling, you get more of that stuff. Many times it's very, very complicated for people to do things they like in the housing areas. The modernists were very good in making obstacles for people to come out and enjoy their shared spaces. We have to be very aware that there are several ways of building new city districts and new housing areas. We have many, many places, I call them hotel housing. That means that they make places where you can sleep and look out of the window. But what I think is important is that you make fine places where you can live, that you focus on the site plan and the neighborhood, and it should be a good place to be all hours, all days, all seasons, all the year, all ages, and all the life, instead of just a bloody hotel where you can sleep. That was another version. The other one I showed you was a version of the city as a machine. Here is the city for living. It's interesting. This is an example from Denmark. And this to the left is a housing area built in the early 70s on the modernistic principles. It's now being heavily remodeled. And what they are doing is they take some of the blocks down, but basically they try to introduce streets. They try to introduce low buildings so they can take the scale out of the area and make it much more humane and much more people-friendly. That's what we do with modernistic stuff in Denmark when we are going to renovate them. And that could also be a model for improving much of the housing stock in Ukraine when you have a chance to make better stuff. This will be the end of my presentation, and that will also be the time for me to send to all of you my warmest wishes for your ongoing work and for the ending of this awful aggression. I wish to you all the best of luck and good luck to Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan, very much for this beautiful lecture. And also we've got a couple of questions from our registration form. Frankly speaking, you answered mostly all of them during the lecture, but still there are a couple more. First of all, you were speaking more about how important is looking for the people when thinking of renovating, but what is the best way to organize people in to involve them into this discussion?
My experience, and that's rather big experience by now, is that you have to work very much with changing the mindset changing the way people think. If everybody think about that city planning is to make the cars happy, we have a problem. And so my experience really is to show people you can have this or you can have that. And that's a matter of what you decide. So you have to have people see how much better the cities could be and situation in the housing areas could be. And then my experience is that people know very well what they like. They don't like this technocratic, quantity-oriented city planning. They would much rather like a good place to live and to raise your children and to be old. So change the mindset, then you can change the cities. And changing the mindset to lectures and films and books and whatever, that's what we did in Denmark for many, many years. So everybody now think that this is the way it should be.
Yeah, thank you. And also another question, how do you think Ukrainian architects should reperceive Soviet modernism? Because in our cities, we have a lot of post-Soviet modernistic stuff.
Yes, I know that. And of course, we can be cynical and say this is a very good opportunity to improve that part of the cities. I showed you some examples here at the end of how this kind of housing areas in Denmark are being improved by introducing smaller buildings between the big ones so that you will have more spaces for people instead of just no man's land.
Yeah,
I think that could answer your question.
Yeah, thank you. And also another question is how to preserve our cultural identity in the cities, how not to dissolve in all of that, just like European style.
I think that is obvious from my talk, that you should find out about what are the traditions, what are the history of the Ukrainian cities, and build on that, and build on how the Ukrainian people are using their cities and their housing areas, and not to be silly internationalists and copy what they do in bloody Dubai. Don't do that. Make something which is local and fits your own people.
Thank you. Also, if someone have questions for Jan, you can also just turn on your microphone and ask, or just write down your question in chat. You can also write it in Ukrainian and we will translate. So we have one question from Polina. Polina, you can turn on your mic and ask
Thank
Jan.
you for the given word. Actually, I wanted to say that I completely agree that cities impact the way how people live. And there is a question, how should people or government or both, which practical steps should they implement in the new cities? Or is it reducing car spaces, or planting more trees and creating green spaces? What should people do firstly? Thank you.
I do think that the most important thing is education and information, because you can never ask for something you have not seen or heard about. So it's important that the ordinary people are informed about what is good city planning in other parts of the world, so they can say, I want this and I don't want that. Because if we let the market and pictures from Dubai influence the way we think, then it could be just as bad as it ever were. So I really believe in education and information in books, film in the television, lectures, everything about public meetings where you get informed about what we know and what the options are. Then you can choose.
Thank you. And also we have another question. Are there any easy or cheap ways to organize space around our current Soviet buildings? What do we need to keep in mind?
I think I have tried to answer that.
Yeah.
And I showed you some examples, but also I showed you some principles. Look at the ground floors, try to put smaller scale into them, try to break up the big no man's land. That's the way which have been tried in a number of places I know, of modernistic housing in Denmark, Sweden, Holland, and so forth, England.
Thank you.
It can be done.
Also keep writing your questions. We have a couple of minutes for one more question, I guess, also. Okay, if nobody's asking, then I will also tell you one question. The question is, Jan, how do you see the future of Ukraine?
Yeah, I certainly see Ukraine as a very important democratic part of Europe. And I certainly see that all of us all over Europe will have to help Ukraine very much in rebuilding. And I think that it will be important to have programs for rebuilding where many countries can contribute. And I really think that we should look closely into making buildings of wood, because wood is sustainable, is renewable. You can get rid of the wood when the building is not used anymore, not so with the concrete. And it's not heavy, so we can build it all over. We can build these elements of wood all over the Europe and transport them to Ukraine, where it can be quickly put up. After the Second World War, Denmark, in the Second World War, some cities in Denmark were bombed, actually by the Russians. And Sweden donated a lot of wooden houses to these cities. They're still there, and they're the most popular areas in these. That's called Swedish town. And and today we are so good in making buildings of wood that I think it would be a very good way of having a quick and sustainable rebuilding in a smaller scale than you're used to, but quickly in Ukraine. I can see that as a possible solution, also a solution where all of Europe can assist you in various ways, because you need a lot of assistance. I realize that. But we admire your struggle for freedom and democracy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the lecture. It was a great inspiration. And thank you for supporting Ukraine. Thank you for being present today. Also, I would like to say that now we are run of time, but actually we will have one more lecture in this series of lectures. It will be on the 19th of May. It will be delivered by Jakob and Frederick, who are philosophers and creators of board game Politics of Nature. So we will be discussing how we can rebuild our society. And if you want to join, please just see the chat. We will leave the application form, and you can just register, and we will meet again on 19th of May. So thank you, Jan, very much.
You may think what kind of sweater I'm having here. That's actually the blouse of my jazz band.
Cool. So you're playing jazz?
Yeah.
Great.
For 40 years, and we always use this sweater when we play. And that's very comfortable because it's spring over here. It's warm. Thank you very much for today. It's been a great experience for me to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone. До побачення. До нових зустрічей. Приєднуйтесь до нашої наступної лекції, заключної, яка буде 19 травня. Посилання ми залишили.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Дякую.
Bye.